I know today's the first day of winter, and it's pretty cool out there. But look, it shows that there is some interest, which is fantastic, and why we put these events like this on. I hope there are a few live watching us live as well. So, look, we wanted to try and do our engagement for this long-term plan amendment a little differently this time. Generally, we have invited or had pre-meetings with groups one by one and tried to get their feeling for what the questions that we needed to answer. So this is a great way of actually getting a wider cross-section of people to talk about some of the things we are going to do. Look, long-term plan amendments don't come around very often. We're only required by law to do a long-term plan every 3 years, and we are due to do that 2024. One of the reasons why we are doing this year, of course, was because of the landfill. We wanted to get that issue sorted, and it has to be discussed in a long-term plan time frame. So that's one reason why we're doing an amendment, because otherwise we would have had to wait another 12 months to include the landfill, and that would have been problematic in terms of contracts and other things that are sitting in the background. The other reason is that when we did our annual plan in 2022 for 2022-23, we said that we would do a rates review. We were very worried about affordability. We were very worried about how rates were shared, distributed across the district, and thought the only fair way of doing that is to then have that conversation with the community in terms of is our rating system fair? So we actually started this long-term plan amendment process in July last year. Now, since then, of course, we've had a new council start in October 2022, so we have 8 new councillors, only 5 returning out from last term. So a heck of a lot of work has been done in pre-consultation phase, in terms of making sure that councillors themselves are up to speed, but also making sure that they understood the options and the content of this consultation document. Obviously, the other thing that we have to follow statute. So we are governed by, in terms of what we can do and how we do it, by the Local Government Act, and that's one of the reasons why we do consultation documents, and that we make sure that we try and engage as possible. We've got 14 events between now and the end of April, so councillors are going to be pretty busy, and hopefully we'll get plenty of feedback from the community in terms of what we want. So tonight we're going to, Jacinta's going to give us a bit of a rundown on the rating system, how it impacts, what are the changes that we're considering, obviously put those details out there in a bit more sort of focused way. Obviously we're here to answer questions if you've got them, but this is just as much about preparing you for your submission. You won't solve anything tonight, but it's getting a better understanding of how the system works, potential issues that you might see that affect you, and there'll be plenty of time between even now and when submissions close at the end of the month for you to ask further questions, find out more information, and then make a submission for us, because that's the reason we're here. As councillors, we need to understand what your views are. If we don't, then if we don't get them or we don't understand, then we're not doing our job and making good decisions based on what our community want us to do. So I'm going to hand to Jacinta now, who's going to take us through a presentation that I'm sure will be interesting and informative.
Tēnā koutou. My name is Jacinta Striker and I'm the Group Manager of Organisation Performance here at the Council. So my role previously as the CFO, but now looking after the finance function. So I hope this session to be really informal and a chance for you to get a better understanding about what we're proposing. So please at any time during the conversation, just feel free to ask a question or ask me to stop and clarify something, because I think it'll work a lot better if you've got the opportunity just to jump in and ask questions as we go. So I hope it'll probably take about 20 minutes just to go through some of the key information, and then we'll have a chance at the end and during for you to ask whatever questions you'd like in regards to the rating system or in regards to rates or other topics if you wanted to raise what you might like to know more about. Cool. So for us, rates are one tool that the council has in terms of funding. Unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, for this council, we struggle in terms of other sources of income that other districts might have, such as investment funds, airports, and other investments that might help to reduce the rates burden. So for us, in terms of the income that we get in, rates represents approximately 80% of what we need to run the district. So it's significant. And so for us, when we look at some of the benchmarks and look at how we're performing in tools such as the ratepayers report, the taxpayers union report, we look good in terms of expenditure, but then when you look at rates per resident, that doesn't look quite as good, and that is because we don't have the level of other income that other districts might have. It's always going to be an aim to try and look at other avenues for income, but at the moment that's what rates is, approximately 80% of what we have coming in. Just another way to look at it as well, for this financial year that's coming up, our rates revenue sits at about 51.8 million. And that includes GST as well. In terms of fees and charges, represents about 4 million, but seeing again that the huge majority of it sits in that rates revenue space. So for this rates review, as Mayor Bruni mentioned, affordability was a massive factor, and in terms of the elected members asking me, in terms of me and my team, what they wanted to make sure was considered during this process was, are there different ways to assess equity? Can we look at different ways to make more equitable and affordable to all ratepayers across the district? Are there different ways that we can share rates that would, from their perspective, would be deemed as more equitable? And as well, because rates continue to be a stress, is how can we make this sustainable in the long term? And ultimately as simple as possible as well. One other factor to consider in this process, and we'll talk through it in a little while, is that this year as well, and as you will have received in your mailboxes, the revaluation occurred. So there's a number of different factors that are occurring as part of this rates review, and one of them as well was the fact that we have our three-yearly revaluation that occurred as of August this year as well, that's influencing this rates review as well. So in terms of some of the different options that the council considered in ultimately landing at the position of a conversation with you all today, is options around moving the current land value based rates to capital value. So that's one of the key proposals that you'll see in this considerations for the consultation. And also looking at making sure that those that cause a burden or provided services are paying their share. And that ultimately means that where people are needing to pay a fee to contribute towards the cost of running something, it would be reasonable that they would pay. So for us, in terms of the conversation with elected members and leading into this consultation, there were some changes made in the environmental health area and also in the dog registration area. And that was to lift the level of fees so that ultimately the burden in terms of rates was a little bit less. As well, this council, in terms of fixed charges, has a considerably high number of fixed charges. When you look at our fixed charges in total, it's almost close to 60% of our rates is related to fixed charges. Now, in saying that, we have about water and wastewater are also fixed charges, which not everyone needs to pay. But for us in this council, there is a significant portion related to fixed charges. So for us, the consideration that the council wanted to make sure we were looking at and having a conversation with the community about is, are we comfortable with the level of fixed charges? Or do we want to look at shifting some of those to a different method, such as land value or capital value? So that was part of the conversation this year. But as I noted, and you can see in the green text there, a conversation was that maybe that was a better conversation for the next review. So as we work through the conversation today, there is the item that we'll talk about in terms of the consultation item that we've gone out with, in terms of moving the general rate from land value to capital value. But those other conversations around fixed charges, I had a conversation with somebody a little bit earlier around the Foxton water rate, and should that be part of a rate that's set across the district. So there's different types of conversations that will happen over the coming years. And as part of the conversation today, I welcome any thoughts from you all about, and through the submission forms, about different ideas that you want to make sure are considered in the future, if they haven't been part of the conversation so far.
Do you want me to say that now?
You can mention it now, sure. Yeah. No, it's fine.
So I had this burning question since we've been in approximately 6 years now. When we got our first water rate bill, and it wasn't something that we used to, but that's fine. I went back and did some sums. I got some information from the council website as to what other people were paying. The fixed charge we're paying at Quotable Value as opposed to pretty much everybody else in the district, and how much water they got built into the fixed rate. And I actually, I think it would say bring the council that again, I totally said to you guys, but nevertheless, so what I have discovered is that if I personally, anybody possibly was to use the 91 cubic meters per quarter that is allocated to the rest of the district, or the rest of the district is allocated, I would be paying an extra $430 a year for that water. Now, I don't know if you read the background behind how it's worked out, but what I'm saying is if we had a rates system that was equitable over the whole area, either everybody else gets charged the same as Oxford Beach, so therefore so much for the first 50 cubic meters, and then so much for the next 41, like we do, and then maybe you get more money if the people who watch their water supply a lot better. I have some figures here.
And that's fine. And what I'll do is I'll take down your number and we can have a chat separately about that together. But it's a good point to make, and it's something that we absolutely, as part of an ongoing review, and particularly with the level of water meters rising as new development goes in across the district, it's a conversation, it's a point that's always worth looking at. So, yeah. Yeah. Oh, so what I'll do is as we have items or things that people want to consider, I'll pop them up there and then we can make sure that they form part of what's considered for the next rounds. Yep. Lastly, as well, in terms of remissions, there was a conversation about, does this council, there are some councils across New Zealand that do offer rates remissions based on affordability. So that was a conversation that was had with this council, and there was not an appetite to pursue it for this year, but it was an item that was asked to be left for future consideration. So just to flag that one as well. So what I thought I'd do quickly, and I won't go into lots of detail, but just to make sure that everyone's aware of our different types of rates and how they're set. So I'll run through those quite quickly. And feel free to ask questions as we go. So this is this year's current rates. So we've got $47 million in total for rates for this current financial year that we're in. So our general rate is currently based on capital value. It's currently based on land value. And at the moment, there is a differential, which means for all properties which are deemed as used for farming purposes, and that's defined by Quotable Value as arable, horticulture, dairy farming, and other farming related activities, they receive, for every dollar that the district-wide pays, the rural sector pays 50 cents for that. And that is based on a conversation around the size of the land relative to this area. So that's the general rate. In terms of solid waste, it's a fixed charge, and that's how we pay. But
So you've got absolute numbers over here, but what are the actual proportions of farming properties versus other properties? So while farming might pay an absolute amount, how many people or how many entities are paying that amount versus?
I think I have that at. Oh, there's a big population difference for sure. Yeah, I think there's a slide to come, and I think I've got numbers in there. I've definitely got total value in terms of a slide coming, but I can absolutely grab that for you. Yeah. Then in terms of solid waste, there's two different charges. They're all fixed. There's a higher rate for the town and a lower rate for rural. That's generally on the assumption that from a recycling perspective, while it isn't specifically in the policy, there is a lesser level of service in those rural areas. So for solid waste, that is probably likely to be an area that would be up for future review in terms of, as things change, have we got that quite right now in terms of that solid waste charge? So it's not being reviewed currently, but maybe one for the future, depending on what happens with the landfill. Then if we get into stormwater, so currently that's townships that pay that rate. So if you're in the rural areas, that isn't. There are a few that are in the pocket areas that are more of a residential type development in that area that will pay it, but other than that, it's in the towns area for stormwater. Our library rate is the $239.37 there. That's a fixed charge per separately used or inhabitable part. So when we say that if you've got two dwellings on a property, then you pay two lots of that charge. So that's what happens with the library one. Representation and governance, aquatics, those are both, again, fixed charges that are paid by everyone on a per unit basis. Roading is a capital value based charge, and that's the same rate regardless of where you live or what type of property you have. Then when we get to water, and I've simplified it for the Foxton part, apologies, just for the purposes of this conversation. But in some areas there is a targeted fixed charge, and then for people that have meters, there's also a charge for them based on any usage over 91 cubic meters across the district. So there's about, of our water meter, you can see there, it's about 1.4 million in total that comes from water meters. So it's probably about a fifth of the total there. Then waste, and so for us as well, it's important to clarify because this question comes up quite a bit, is around if you don't have access to connect to water or wastewater, then you're not charged for it. If you have the ability to connect to it, as in we have the services to the boundary, but you're not connected, then you generally pay half. So that's just to give an idea of how those rates are set. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to the next one? Just for a bit of context, I thought it might be useful just to give a bit of a view of how rates are charged in different areas, some close to us, Pitt Kapiti to the south, Upper Hutt, so just a few to compare, just to give a sense in terms of fixed charges in the grey, capital value in the yellow, land value in the blue, and water by meter in the green. So it just gives a sense of, across New Zealand, the way that councils charge is very different. There are different moves in different directions, but that just gives you a sense from from a council perspective of where we sit. Oh, yes, you can. Thank you. And apologies.
So you're also saying that Ringatikki, Mount Tuura, Bayhu, and Upper Hutt don't have any land value rating.
That's right. Yeah. One thing we wanted to make sure we were doing during this process was being as evidence-based as we could. So one thing that we did, I know we gathered from census, and I know it was back in 2018 because it's difficult to get any information that was more relevant, but we grabbed median household income at what you would call a mesh block and area unit, or SA1 and SA2 level. Those are these individual areas of the district. So what we can gather from there is median household income for each of those areas. That gives us a good sense of affordability, in the sense of what we did with each of those is we looked at the median rates for each of those different areas and assessed rates as a portion of median household income. And that gives it's the best proxy that you can find from a local government perspective in terms of affordability. So you're absolutely right. Yeah. So it's a very good point. So in these rural areas where water and wastewater particularly, and for slightly less for solid waste, it's about $50 less. Yes. So, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Pardon me? Some don't. Yeah, you're right. And yeah, so stormwater isn't either. So you would expect to see this lower. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah. And it has to be a bit of a broad, but at least it's some evidence to give a bit of a clue of where rates are a struggle for some. For us, definitely in some areas of central living, in Foxton and Shannon, we were seeing rates as a share of income up as high as sort of 9 and 10%, which is significant. And so part of the conversation was about what's reasonable, or what would the council like to have a conversation with the community about in terms of how that might be deemed as more equitable in terms of sharing it. I do live on a farm as well, just saying. I do understand. But yeah. And I absolutely hear what you're saying, and it's a conversation. And it's not to say everyone's going to have really different views. And I think it's probably important just to stop and say at this point, what we're trying to do through this process is make sure everybody is as informed as possible about what's changing and the impact that it has on their individual properties. So you will all be receiving in the next few days a letter in your mailbox, and that will be outlining to you what your proposed rates increase is in total, and also it will be outlining to you the portion of there's 3 reasons why your rates might be changing this year. One is because we've had a revaluation, which I'll talk through in a minute. The other one is because we've got a rates increase, which is 7.9% as an overall total. And also because we've got a rates review. So there's individual components of that increase that we've outlined specifically in the letter for you as well, so that you'll be able to understand the different things that we're proposing to change and the impact that they're having on your individual property. So the aim is hopefully that everyone is well informed and has a chance to come and let us know what you think. So I'm not sure how many of you have seen the overall picture from Quotable Value in terms of the revaluation that occurred in August. But it's the blue lines represent the capital value change and the orange lines represent the land value change. So as you can see, in the rural area, there is definitely a big difference. There's a big difference here, but industrial area saw massive land value change. Commercial as well, residential as well in terms of land value, lifestyle properties. In the more rural zone, not as high as was in the residential, commercial, industrial. So some massive changes. Development happening, Tararua Road, other areas of the district that have had significant industrial development occurring, and then changes in terms of the land structure or in terms of ability to zone that allows then the value of that property to increase significantly. The Taraika development as well is in terms of the lifestyle area, there was a massive growth in that area as well. So those are some of the big drivers. This one just gives a view as well in terms of what was happening across the district in terms of residential properties. So Shannon was one that just shot up hugely this time in terms of an increase, as did Tokomato and Foxton. So that just gives you a bit of a sense of, in terms of across the district, where we're seeing some of the big valuation changes. In terms of objections and things, we didn't have a heap of objections this time around. Just to flag that, it's pretty much wrapping up. Now, what I wanted to do before we get into the items that we have gone up for consultation on, I wanted to also mention the ones that didn't make the cut, and because they were part of public conversations and workshops that we had, sort of 3 leading up to the point, 3 or 4 over the period from November to now. So some of the options that were looked at were, of course, the ones that have gone forward. One is the status quo option. The second one is the general rate and shifting all of the general rate from land value to capital value. The third option is shifting all of the general rate from land value to capital value with some differential for rural farming properties. Those are the 3 that are included in the consultation document, with option 2 as the preferred option. Other options, though, were considered through this process, and they relate to looking at options to shift some of the fixed rates, fixed charges like the library and the community centre, or the governance rate, and shifting those to capital value. So some of those options were considered, but it was determined at this stage to go out with the top 3 and to leave any conversation about fixed charges to a future review. These ones are already across the district, ones that everyone pays. Yeah, so they would be. They are a targeted rate in the sense that they're unique to themselves, and then they're charged across the district. So I guess, yeah. So in terms of what the different options mean, this information on the next few slides is included in all the consultation documents that you have in front of you. But I thought it was worth just touching on a few points so you can find your way through the document. So leaving the rating system as it currently is. So that would mean making no changes to the rating system, but having the impacts of the rates review and the rates increase. So those would be, the valuation and the rates increase. Those would be the only changes that would affect a property. From that side, what this is intending to do is just give you a bit of a picture. So if that was the case, we would have seen 65% of rates for residential ratepayers go up and 35% go down. There are, of course, very different scales of what goes up and what goes down, but this is a generalized in terms of if you're going up, we're including you in that number, and if you're going down, we're including you in this number. From a rural farming perspective, we would have seen 55% going down and 45% increasing. Businesses would have seen a significant increase in terms of 68% going up, 32% going down. Other rural properties would have seen a decline. Other rural properties, just so everybody knows, are if you're not a farming property, so you don't have dairy, livestock, horticulture, it's a lifestyle or that type of property. That's what that one means there. And then utilities. In terms of the preferred option, there is a change in the rural farming area. Still some up and down in the even zones, but also in residential you see more dropping down. One area that is changing under this option quite significantly is that because utilities, previously there's a lot of utilities that don't have land value associated with them when there's significant capital value. So in this instance, there's a significant amount that close to sort of 700,000 that will flip in terms of being paid by the utility sector with this change as well. So that's one of the key changes that's worth mentioning in terms of the rates review here. In the rural farming area as well, and that's why we really wanted everyone to know the individual impacts for themselves, because the impact of going from land value to capital value is going to be difficult for some of the capital intensive farms. So for the likes of chicken farm or where you have significant buildings relative to land, that's where we're seeing the increase. So just thought it was worth mentioning that one specifically because that's being discussed during the workshops in terms of an impacted area. Then as well is the third option, which is about still going to capital value, but potentially offering a lower rate in the rural farming area. So that's in terms of calling that a differential. So in terms of some of the advantages or disadvantages, option one is of course less change. It's closest to the current system. But the council were quite clear in terms of talking about this openly, in terms of the views on what equity was, is that they felt that it disadvantages lower income households which have a smaller capital value relative to land value. So this review in terms of option two was definitely aiming to look at those smaller houses with small plots of land and saying, is it more reasonable that they pay less than an equal size, a bigger sized house with a bigger portion of land on that same street. And I know this is a very a topic that quite a few people have very different views on. So I'll talk through these pros and cons, and then I might open up a bit of a conversation to see if anybody wanted to raise anything at this point. So option two, the conversation was that it more closely reflects the value of a property, capital value, rather than just the land value, because it incorporates all the buildings as well. And it's consistent with the principle driving the rates review of increasing equity and affordability of rates. Being aware, though, from a disadvantage perspective, that it has significant increases for high capital value properties. So we're very aware of that.
Can you satisfy the LIMS reports that are up to speed to practice?
In what area with the LIMS do you mean? Quotable Value do the valuation on our behalf. And if we do have building work that occurs during the year, or during that 3-year period, then the Quotable Value will generally ask if there's been any work done that they need to have included in the valuation, and it can get amended during the review process or during the valuation process. So from that perspective, that's how that, and if anyone does receive a valuation and they're not satisfied that it's enough, they can object and have it changed. Yep. So in the letter they receive, properties received, it definitely mentions that they're able to object and they have a period of time with which they can do that. Yeah. And I know there was a question earlier just around total values of rates. So this just gives you a sense of the different categories of the district. So we've got some non-rateable properties, business. We do have some new properties coming in, so that's what that growth number is. You can ignore that. Rural farming, residential, rural other. So you can see in the rural farming area, for example, the total rates paid currently in this financial year was 5.66 million. And in terms of, that's proposed to be 5.85 million in 2024. So this slide just gives you a sense of and when people receive their letters, I know it'll be individualized for their own properties, but they'll see a letter which says, for me, I had $5.6 million in rates. If nothing else had happened and it was only the valuation, I would have seen a decrease of $888,000 in the rates. And that's because there's no change overall in the rates, but the share of where it sits changes because the valuations change. So that's what that means. There's also then a change due to the general rates from land value to capital value. So that is the change that's being proposed as part of the review. So I'm just picking on rural because there was a question there, so I hope that's okay. And then in terms of there was 767,000 worth of rates increase to lead to a total change of 190,000 or 5.8. A key reason why in the rural area as well, there wasn't as big of an increase from a rates increase perspective as will be across the rest of the district is because the water and wastewater rates and stormwater were held lower this year, lower than the rest of the district rates. So for those properties that don't pay for water and wastewater, overall that percentage increase in terms of a rates increase was lower. That's probably a good point to stop. Does anyone have any questions, issues, points they wanted to raise? If off the top of, I can grab it on my laptop shortly if that's okay. I've got it sitting there, I just haven't got it on the screen. I thought I did, sorry. Yeah.
If you were to change the capital value rate, how are you going to cope with market fluctuations?
It's always difficult to cope with that. What we've seen though, in terms of, I'll just quickly flick back. If you look at the fluctuation in terms of land value of the orange versus the fluctuation of capital value, then there isn't as significant a fluctuation in terms of change. So that's one consideration. So as well, the rate that we did move to capital value was already on land value, so it was already subject to fluctuations. It was just about figuring out what was the most reasonable method to use. not going to go into that one too much. I'll go into this one.
Because it's so big, it's hard to hear.
Hi, I'm just wondering if there is a trend towards a move to capital value in other districts in New Zealand.
Yes, there generally has been, although in saying that, I know Wellington City Council, for example, are looking at a review currently, and they are considering both options. In terms of Topua, a number of years ago did theirs and did a shift to capital value. I was involved in a rates review at Kapiti that definitely was shifting towards capital value. I think generally I'd say there are a lot that are going that way, but it's by no means, yeah. I feel like I've probably given you enough statistics now and data. I guess what I want is, have you got enough information? What's sort of sitting there and making you wonder or making you squirm that you might want to mention in terms of a conversation, if you're comfortable raising it today, or any questions that are sitting there that I haven't answered at this point? So yes, good. So the letter will come out to everyone, but also on our website as of tomorrow, you'll be able to search any property and see all the individual components of the rates increase as well.
But basically what I mean is, have you done a set of different kinds of idealised capital values for different types of properties across the district? So, these properties in this area have got this amount of capital value and will have this kind of charge versus these other ones over in this locality. Have you got something like that organised on the letter? Sorry.
Oh, so it should be that page you're looking at there, is the sort of the detail that for the consultation document is available to everybody. So it's a sample of properties across the district and what the proposal is and where the changes are coming from. So we don't have, it's not extensive to that, but everyone can go online and search and everybody will be receiving the information. Equally, if for any particular groups or any form of analysis or submission, if you would like any additional analysis or bits of information, it's all been through public processes. We've had heaps of data and analysis prepared. So more than happy to, if you just get in contact with me, I'll make sure I've leave my telephone number and email at the end. Feel free to just ask as well.
Are you confident that
Reduce your bad debtors list.
I couldn't say I'm confident that it would. What I would say is we've reduced it by 20% over the last year, which is a really good thing. So we are consistently trying to work with people so that things don't escalate to the point where they've got a lot outstanding and don't run the risk of losing anything that's cherished by them. So no, I can't guarantee it, but we're definitely working hard at making sure that we are doing good work consistently to make sure we collect stuff. And also, I guess one other one is we're trying really hard to help people to get everything that they're entitled to. So the rates rebates, for example, we've formed an alliance with MSD where they'll allow people to sign a waiver, which means we can email MSD and get their information and complete their rates rebate form for them to save them going across the road and that being an issue. So wherever we can, we're trying to help in that sense in terms of getting people as much as they deserve from a rates rebate.
to increase rates is the landfill. Is that right?
No, it's inflation and the beautiful world that we live in. A loan for us this year, so if you take insurance, interest, depreciation, utilities or electricity charges alone, would have meant a rates increase of 8.2%. So even this rates year, I'd say it's definitely not. So solid waste in terms of a change from this year, there's no significant difference because we already took that change in terms of the extra costs for shipping to Bonnie-Glen in this year, in the short term, depending on what happens. But for us, it's nothing exciting and new. It's just paying for the cost increases that are unavoidable, really. Any other questions? We might finish early.
Hi, the consultation document looks at other things apart from rates. So I did have a question about stormwater. Is it appropriate to ask that now, or is there?
I think we might be able to cheat and ask Monique if she can. We can try it.
Okay, I'm pleased that the document acknowledges that stormwater is a very significant environmental issue, and my question does relate to Foxton Beach stormwater because that's where I come from. Back on 12 June 2020, on behalf of HDC, a really detailed resource consent application and associated environmental effects document was lodged by Good Earth Matters, GEM, with Horizons Regional Council, entitled Foxton Beach Global Stormwater Discharge Consent. This was followed on the 1st of September 2022, last year, with further correspondence from GEM on behalf of HDC to Horizons Regional Council with a summary of stormwater analysis of Fox Beach 2019 to 2022 attached, requesting, as per the covering letter, if formal processing of the application is able to progress in order that Foxton Beach municipal stormwater discharges can be brought into a formally consented framework under the RMA. So I'm just wondering, within the past 6 months, has this occurred? And if not, what is HDC's understanding of why this hasn't happened, and when do you think it will happen?
I think that one might be. I'll pass to Monique. That's definitely not in my area of expertise, so I'll pass.
Yeah, look, please do send me that question and I'll make sure you get a response, a detailed response. What I would say is that in the last 6 months, we've taken time to take a deep breath and pause and rethink infrastructure. And what you'll see in our long-term plan amendment is a proposal to significantly increase the investment across three waters, and you'll note that stormwater is in there. With regard to your specific question around the lodgement of a stormwater consent for Foxton Beach, I'm aware of the work that has occurred, but I can't give you a detailed answer about what has happened. Given you're an elected member, and I'm the chief executive and neither of us know, that would probably indicate that not much has happened, but we will get some additional information to you in time.
And the other thing I'm thinking is that I think the audit office has been a wee bit unfair on council for taking issue with the council's response to three waters. And I just saw the kind of the comments that they made, and I'm just fingers crossed that things can move forward in a decent way.
Yeah, we have some. I guess when we're talking to our funders, so local government funding agency and our rating agency, their comment to me was, "You're doing the right thing in terms of having the right conversation with your community about the options and what might happen in the water space." So, from our side, we're trying to be as informative as possible. Yeah.
So Jacinda has got 3 questions up there for you. Which option do you have a preference for? What are your views on what is equitable? And what would you like us to consider in a future rates review? For this long-term plan amendment, obviously the first 2 are the key questions that we need answers on over the next month. So the process for us now is that submissions will close on May 1. We then do some preparation work and have officers look at those submissions, and we then deliberate or hear those submissions if anyone wants to present to us. Obviously, councillors will read every submission, just warning them that they can expect a lot of folders appearing in their inboxes. And then we deliberate, obviously, in the middle of, towards the end of June, and then sign off at the end of June to be able to strike a rate from 1 July 2024. So this is a pretty critical month in terms of making sure that you are aware of the issues and make your voice heard in terms of getting that in front of councillors. As Jacinda said, though, if you have questions of a technical nature of anything in terms of what's affecting you personally or your areas, then don't hesitate to get in touch with herself or any other officer, but also obviously elected members are available, and there are a number of different hearing or submission, or what we call consultation opportunities for you over the next month, whether it be Facebook or whether it be us in person, or whether it's just ringing up a councillor and asking him a question. Please do so. Spread the word. We're often accused that we don't talk, we do everything behind closed doors. And as soon as we try and open things up, no one wants to come through the door. So, it is, we're trying to do our best to ensure that the message is out there and that they can submit and give us their views if they want to. So unless there's anything further, can I just thank Jacinda and the team for the amount of work that goes into this. This doesn't happen in 5 minutes. It is a huge amount of work that they have done, and as I said, all the data is there. If you want that data, it is available, but they've spent a huge amount of time collating all that, putting it together, trying to, if you like, predict the questions and the amount of information that is going to be needed. And that consultation document, which doesn't look very pretty at the moment, but is at the printers as we speak, and will be a flash-looking document when you see it probably next week. There's a huge amount of work gone on there. And we're pretty proud of that, actually, because I don't think there's anything that you should be able to form your opinions from what is inside that document. So thank you for coming. And as I said, there's a month to go before we close off, so plenty of time to get your views in. David, do you want to say something?
Plug 2 events that are happening tomorrow as we continue on this journey. So tomorrow evening at Te Awaho Newsroom in Foxton, 5:30 to 8 o'clock. That will be a slightly different style. That's sort of what we call an Ask Me Anything session, so people can come along. There'll be elected members, a few officers there. You can come along and get right into all content on the consultation document. It's not just limited to rates. And then at 7 p.m, for those of you who might be home by then, there's the opportunity to tune into a Facebook Live where the Mayor, Bernie, and Councillor Mike will be answering questions or looking at the topic of the landfill. And so again, there's opportunities to feed in questions. It's an interactive session, but also you can sit there and listen to the questions raised and the answers given. So those are the next 2 events, but as has been said, there's a whole program over the next month. So on behalf of the team here, thanks for coming along and making it worthwhile for us, and we will look forward to having further engagement, but most importantly look forward to seeing some submissions come in too.
Cheers. Thank you.